Horror. You've probably experienced it. Whether you played a horror game, or saw a horror movie, or just had a horrifying experience, it's kind of a major part of the human condition. But we're not here to talk about that time that you saw a coat on the door and thought it was a human standing over your bed. We're here to talk about media. Specifically all the spooktacular media that's meant to jangle your bones right to the core. Or attempts to, at least. And I don't know about you, but I've been seeing a problem recently. Nothing really seems to be scary anymore. The things that aren't supposed to be scary become scary and then aren't scary anymore, and the things that are supposed to be scary are silly. The whole dang world is topsy-turvy up in here. And then I really thought about it. Is it possible for things to stay scary? Is it just a reality of the way humans interact with horror media? Will we always outgrow our fear? Is it even possible for one idea to keep you scared forever? Maybe the things that scared me are still scary, but I've just become desensitized. And that's all this video is really gonna be, is me looking into how this problem starts and how people have fixed it. I'm simply looking at them for scare purposes. It's not about whether I like or hate something. And with all that out of the way, let's get into this. I don't think I need to tell you that knowing what's gonna happen makes things like almost instantly not scary. Predictability is just a poison for any kind of actual shock. But on the other hand, the thing you really can't avoid is establishing a brand. You look at Five Nights at Freddy's, Slender, Creepypastas, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th. It's almost like people can't help but make things icons. And not just like selling things with your character on it, but also ruining the horror because you know what's gonna happen. A great recent example of this is the Mandela Catalog. And again, when I say this, I'm not saying it's bad. But if you told me that there was a new episode and asked me what I thought was in it, my immediate response would be, let me guess, there's a distorted face in it. Because that's always in it. It can't not be in it. It's become its identity. He sells a fucking plushie of it. And an even bigger problem is the border between uncanny and goofy is like really close. They're like next door neighbors. And overuse is just gonna make that worse. It's gonna turn them from neighbors into like freaking roommates. A franchise that had the same exact thing happen to them was the Friday the 13th movies. You go from simple premise of teens getting murdered at a summer camp, very personal, very gruesome, to literally shooting your main villain into space to murder people on a space station in the far-flung cyber future while he's wearing a costume that makes him look like the Techno Shredder. Or having him take Manhattan the same way the Muppets did. It took the expressway from Scaryland to Goofysville. And it's like we all know that the longer that things go, the stupider they're gonna get. Heck, they put you in exposure therapy for like real fears. Like heights, other people, spiders, snakes. Things that could actually hurt you. You don't think after a while you're gonna stop being afraid of Freddy Fazbear? An over-reliance on a specific type of horror or scary thing is just gonna result in that thing becoming not scary. And that leads me perfectly into...
I sure like the cut of your gibberish.
Cohen doodly
Diddly oodly,
diddly,
oodly,
doodly,
oodly,
noodly doodly diddly doodly, Chuck the diddly daddler Ratner,
Maple Aidley,
doodly doodly diddly doodly.
Flanderization is the process through which a fictional, formally complex character's essential traits are oversimplified to being their entire personality, or at least exaggerated while other traits remain, over the course of a serial work. And we're gonna have a big brain game theory MatPat moment here. The definition says character. But can an entire piece of media become Flanderized? If we're talking about horror, I think definitely. One piece of horror media I can think of immediately that's become this is FNAF. FNAF used to be so much more than it is today. It had very personal, complex gameplay. It had extreme challenge with things like 2020 mode. And yes, had a very deep story. But those first two traits have completely fallen by the wayside. FNAF is now merely a hollow vessel to funnel overcomplicated lore to you. It's really sad too, because FNAF has just thrown out its extremely unique gameplay, the thing that made it catch on. When FNAF came out, there were no games like that. They threw out super unique gameplay and subbed in cut and dry, run-of-the-mill, copy and paste, linear 3D survival horror. Even if you didn't like FNAF, you couldn't say it wasn't unique. But I guess Steelwool just came in and they were like, hey, I like what you're doing, but what if instead of it being unique, it was like Outlast, Soma, Amnesia, Resident Evil 7, PT, Alien Isolation, Slant of the Arrival, Layers of Fear, and literally any other 3D horror game? What if it was that? Like, I mean, you know, it could have difficult skill-based gameplay, but you know, that's kind of an entry barrier. We want to have like baby gameplay. I think I read on a cocktail napkin somewhere that FNAF is all about lore and nothing else matters. So we'll just do that to the extreme. And now we've come to a point where one of FNAF's many interesting traits is its only trait. It's become overly simplified in its pursuit of becoming overly complicated. Because that's all it is now. Overcomplicated lore just for the sake of being overcomplicated. And in that pursuit, FNAF becomes just like every other horror game for kids. Completely uninspired and practically unrecognizable. So, how do you stay scary? A good thing to start with is always keep changing what the center of the fear is. If you can't orient yourself to figure out what the next thing is going to be, the likelihood it's going to be shocking and even terrifying exponentially increases. A great example of this is the Silent Hill games. And I'm not really talking about the individual scares in the game, I'm talking about the games themselves. If you played Silent Hill 1 all the way up to the PT teaser, and then you looked back at everything, every Silent Hill game has a personal enough story that the horror is allowed to shift to what the main character of that game finds scary. It's what makes Silent Hill an anthology series opposed to a linear series of sequels, because the only uniting theme is Silent Hill, the physical location. Anthology might be the best way to portray horror. It's why things like Black Mirror and The Twilight Zone are so successful. It's like a horror shotgun blast. So many different kinds of scares being thrown at you, one of them is going to hit. If you only utilize one thing to be scary, or it is locked in a specific genre of horror, you're gonna alienate everyone who isn't afraid of that specific thing. Something else that could really work is making the world that the story exists in big enough that you can look at it from many different angles. Every type of horror can exist in tandem in that world because it's big enough to accommodate it. Something that executes this amazingly is the SCP Foundation. You can have your classic monster horror, you can have body horror, you can have cosmic horror, you can have psychological horror, you can have any kind of horror that you could possibly want. It's the reason the SCP Foundation is probably the biggest collaborative work ever created. It's just an ever-expanding universe of very personalized fear. And that's really the long and short of it. Don't tie yourself down! All it's gonna do is make the fear fade. It's a shame, but it's the truth. I love horror, man. Being afraid is fun. But fear is also an important emotion. Fear could be a signifier of real danger, or it could be completely debilitating. So maybe it's a good thing to always have to find a new fear. It's like a badge of honor that you've conquered all the fears previously put before you. Because not only are you getting that rush, but you're becoming stronger. You're evolving and changing just like all the media around you does all the time. Maybe it's just something that happens in life. But it's like Phineas and Ferb said, one little scare ought to do you some good.